Hey, wonderful people. In today's video, we are going to start talking about HTML forms, how to create a form in HTML. So by definition, an HTML form is used to collect data or to collect user input. If you have a website and you want your website users to, write some input, you are going to use a form to collect this input. So the user input is most often sent to a server for processing. So if you want to create a form in HTML, you are going to need to use a particular element. So that element is the form element. So you write form here. It has an opening tag and a closing tag. So the HTML form element is used to create an HTML form for user input. So when you write this like I've written here, inside you are going to write your form elements. Okay, you can have various form elements that we are going to see in just a couple of minutes. So the form element is a container for different types of inputs, just like I said. For example, you can write text fields, checkboxes, radio buttons, submit buttons, etc., etc. And all these various elements, we are going to talk about them in this video. So the first form element that we can talk about is going to be the input element. Okay, so I'm going to write input like this. So the input element here is, let me say, the most used form element. So an input element can be used to display so many things, okay, depending on the type of input that you want. For example, you can use the input element to display a text field. So if you say type attribute like this and say text, this is going to allow you to display a single line text input field. You can also use the input element to display radio buttons, checkboxes, a submit button, or a clickable button. And we are going to have a look at that. So let's say that you want to create a text field. How should you do that? So if you want to create a text field, this is what you need to do. So you are going to write input and you will say text field in the type attribute. So let's just say first name here, like this. And we will break line PR like this. So this is going to make sure that the first name is going to appear on top of the text field. So here we have our text field. You can add maybe some other attribute, the name attribute. We'll say first name like this. So that's it. If you want to create more text fields, for example, we will say here. So instead of first name, we will say last name. And we will break line here. And here, for this particular input, we are going to call it last name. So you can use the name to differentiate your inputs, okay? So this input's name is first name and this input's name is last name. So that's basically how you can create your input, your text field, okay? And so this is what I was telling you. If you want to create a single line input field for text input, this is how you can do that. And so what if you want to add some label? Okay, a label is another element that you can use in the form, and it defines a label for your form elements. So if you note here, we have the first name. It's a text that we want to show on the screen. We can actually display that using the label element. So we all know what a label is. So in HTML, you can use the label element to do just that. So the label element is very useful for screen readers because the screen reader will read out loud the label when the user focuses on the input element. And also the label element helps users who have difficulty clicking on very small regions such as radio buttons or checkboxes, because when the user clicks on the text within the label element, it will toggle the radio button or the checkbox. And so that's it. We can also add the label here. Okay. Label, close it like this. Okay. So that's basically what we can talk about label. And when you use the label, you can actually add another attribute. You can add an attribute. You can say for example, and then in the for attribute here should be equal to the ID attribute of your input element in order to bind them together. So if you want to make sure that this particular label is bound to this input, you need to have an ID attribute in your input. And in that particular ID, you are going to assign a value. Let's say, for example, first name here. And if you want to make sure that the system is going to bind your ID, your input ID with the label here, they need to have the same value assigned. So the for attribute here should be equal to the ID in your input. So that's basically that. So we will say for, and this one will be last name. And so here we will say ID equal last name. So that's it. The for attribute of the label tag should be equal to the ID attribute of the input element in order to bind them together. That's how this works. So let's say that you want to create another type of input. For example, if you want to create maybe a password, okay, password input or password field control, you are still going to use the input element. Okay, let me just copy this, paste it here. So as for this one, maybe you will say password like this. Let me break line here before. So I will say password, and here you will say password. So if you say password here in your ID, say password like this, and the name, you say password. And the type. So this field is going to be used by the user if he wants to enter his password. So the field will be the type here, you will say password. Okay, so the difference would be that if you come here in your text field, a normal text field control, if you write, you can see exactly what you write displaying on the screen. Okay, here you can see. But what if you come in your password field and write there? You can only see bullets because of security reasons. That's basically the control that is put in place in your password input. And also, if you come in your password field here, you can't see just that. But what if I copy this and paste it here? Come here and try to copy. You can see I am not able to copy because of the control. So that's for the password control. What other thing that we can talk about? We can talk about another input, which is going to be the text area. So as for the text area, let me just break line here. So for the text area, we will say like this. Let me just copy, paste it here. So I'm going to call this maybe a message. For the label, I will say label message. And instead of writing the input here, I'm going to say that I will use text area element, text area, like this. So this is a closing tag. I need to add the forward slash like that. And in the text area, I can also use some attributes, the rows attribute. For example, if I say rows, it will allow me to specify, the width of my text area. For example, if I say rows 15, there you can see how it's going to increase the rows. If I say 10, it's going to adjust. So if I say columns, for columns, I will say calls here, and then I will determine the number of columns. Like if I say 5, now you can see how it is reducing. If I say 50, it's going to increase. If I say 20, that's how it's going to show. Like, let me say 25. Yes, so that's how you can actually play around your text area. You can also, we talked about the label, we talked about the password field control. There's another control that you can talk about that would be the email field control. So the email field control, we are going to use the input element as well. So let me copy this and come up here. So instead of password here, I will say email. And for the label, that will be email as well. So for the input, the type of the input here would be email. Okay, so this is to specify that this particular input will be an email. For the ID, I want it to be equal to the 4 attribute in the label. I will say email, and then the name would be email as well. Okay, so now you can see I have my email showing, my email field showing here. Okay, so with the email, if you do not enter the correct email format, this is how the field is going to show. When you put your cursor on the field, it's going to show a tooltip instructing you to include, an @ sign. If I include my @ sign here, I will still have another message that will instruct me to actually write a correct email address. If I write here, then when I put my cursor, no tooltip or no message will show, because this is actually a correct email format. If I say that here and come, there you can see another message showing that I need to, write a correct format, because this is not a correct format for my email. If I say that come, this is a correct format of my email. So this is just to say that with HTML, by default, when you write your email input like this, by default, your HTML is going to bring some control. Okay, so it's going to tell you to write the correct format for your email, and you need to actually respect that. So these are some of the things that you can play around using your input element. Now let's talk about how to create buttons. Okay, if you want to create some radio buttons, for example, how do you do that? So as for radio buttons, we are still going to need, how do you call it, input. So what I'm going to do, let me simply copy this. I'm going to copy the input here. I will paste it down here. So as for the type, I will say the type of this input would be radio, to specify that this is a radio button. And for the name, I will say Google. I need to write in lowercase. Or I can say top_city. As for the ID, I can say Paris, for example. So now you can see I have a circle showing here. So if I have the circle, then for the value, I will say value here. And in my value, I will say Paris. Okay. So now we are going to need a label. So we will say label. Show it down here. For we need to be equal to the ID. So the ID we say Paris. And inside the label, we say Paris, like this. And we are going to remove the break line. So let me just put some space here. We are going to, no, that's not where I need to remove my break line. So I will say remove break line here. But in here, I will add the break line. So that's basically what I wanted to show you, how to create your radio button. If I add another break line here, just to show you what I mean, maybe add another one down here. That's the on top here, break line. So that's what I was telling you, that the label element is also used. It's really important when you are working with radio buttons because it allows you to display the label for your radio buttons. If you remove label here, you see, if I remove this, you only have a circle. You don't have any label. But if you bring back the label, then you have your radio button with a label beside it. And how to know that this particular label is linked to our radio button is because of the ID and the 4 attributes. So you have to make sure that your 4 attribute in the label is equal to your ID in the input. So that's basically what you need to do. If you want to have multiple, what have I done? Okay, let me copy this. We're going to create multiple, maybe 2 more radio buttons. Let me remove the break line here. This one as well. And then we are going to do some modification here. So I'll say London. Here needs to be equal to the ID in the input. We'll say London. As for this one, we say Milan. Up here will be Milan as well. For the 4 attributes, I'll say Milan. And I'll say Milan here. So let me just say Paris here in capitals as well. Paris. So now you can see that you have your radio button, your radio buttons showing on the screen. So, okay, so now the next thing that we need to talk about would be how to create checkboxes, if you want to create your checkbox. But first of all, let me reduce the size of my text area. If I say 5 like this, maybe 8. Okay. Now, if you want to create some checkboxes, you are going to need the input element as well. And you are going to give it the type of checkbox. So let me copy this. Okay. And so input, the type here, instead of saying radio, I would say checkbox. Checkbox. The ID, as for the name, I will say the name of this checkbox, I will say France, for example. ID, I will say France. You can give the name that you want. As for me, I will say France here. And the value, I'll say France as well. So maybe here I'll say, no, for the name, I'll say country. One. And then if I come to my label, So the for attribute needs to be equal to the ID. So I'll say France, and I'll say France like this. There you can see the checkbox showing on the screen. All right. If I maybe add another checkbox like this, maybe here I will say England, and the name will be country 2. The value will be England. For attribute will be England. And here I will say England. All right. So that's how you create a checkbox in HTML. So you have radio button, you have checkbox here, you have text area, you have password field, email field, last name. These are text fields. Yes. Now we are going to see how you can create a submit button. Okay. So the submit button, as usual, you are going to need the input element. Okay, so we are going to say, let me just copy it. I'll come down here and I will say input. The type of input, if you want to create a submit button, you will say type submit. And then another attribute that will be needed here is going to be the value. The value is actually going to be the label that will show on the button. You can say submit like this. So let me bring the break line here. Yes. So now you can see we have our button here showing on the screen. Okay, so the submit button, this particular input defines a button for submitting your form data to a form handler. So the form handler is typically a file on the server with a script that will be used to process your input data. And the form handler is going to be specified in the form's action attribute. All right, so this is how you can create your button. And one last thing I want to talk to you about would be the name attribute. You can notice that here in our input, we have the name attribute here, name in our input. You know, the text field, the email field, the password field, you know, the radio button, the checkbox, we have the name attribute. So you have noticed that each input field must have a name attribute in order to be submitted. So if the name attribute is not there, is omitted, the value of the input field will not be sent at all. So if you don't put the name attribute, but when you click on submit, you know, the value of that particular field will not be submitted. This is actually a rule that you need to know about. So guys, this is what I wanted to talk to you about when it comes to HTML forms, how to create a form and the various form elements that you can have, you know, the text fields, the email fields control, the password control, how to create a radio button, a checkbox, a text area, in order to write comments, messages, you know, multiple lines, text, and also how to create a submit button in your form. So for this video, we are going to stop here. I'm going to make some other videos where I will show you some more details. I hope it was informative enough. If you have any question, feel free to write them in the comment section. But don't forget to like the video and subscribe to this YouTube channel. Let's meet in the next video.